Having looked at this next topic for a year ago, there's been quite a few changes, but exactly how does it work? It's Azure Active Directory Conditional Access. Are you ready? Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Andy here. So nice to see you. As always, if this is your first visit here, you are very, very welcome. Okay, first of all, this topic today, I looked at it well over a year ago actually, and there's been so many changes. I thought it was a good opportunity to really kind of revisit it and do a really nice step-by-step how-to session. So we're going to talk about how to configure it, and more importantly, of course, how it works and what it can do for you. Now, if you've not subscribed to the channel, we love subscribers. Bump that subscribe button, ring the bell, and you won't miss out on the good stuff in the future. And comments, questions, as always, get them down below. I love your feedback. It really keeps me going. Also, if you enjoy the session as well, bump the like button. It really does help. Okay, so a little bit of a demo ahead, so definitely stick around and watch all of that because there's some interesting new features that are going to be included. All right, hope you enjoy. Thank you. So conditional access, as I said, monitors signals. So based on the device that you're using, based on the application that you're trying to access, in the location where you're trying to access it, all right? These are some of the signals, and based on those signals, you'll either get entry or you'll not get entry. If you get entry, it may require some additional information, for example, multi-factor authentication. And as I've mentioned, it replaces Active Directory Federation Services claim rules from previous versions. So when we talk about conditional access, it can monitor the user and their location. It can monitor the application that the user's logging onto. It can monitor the device, and it can do this in real time. And it can also analyze the risk level of that user as well. Every access attempt, so this is a core component of Zero Trust, verify every access attempt. Now, based on that access, of course, you'll get in or you won't get in, or it will ask for more details. So I'm going to come into Azure Active Directory, and I'm going to scroll down in Azure AD, and I'm going to come into the security portal. First up, named locations. So you can have named locations, of course, based on countries and IP address location. So with IP address location, you can also mark those as trusted IP address locations. So for example, if you had an office in London, one in Oslo, one in Paris, New York, and so on. The other thing that you can also configure is your multi-factor authenticated trusted IP addresses. So you can come into here and you can actually say, hey, these ranges of IP addresses, I want to trust them. And you can see that this takes us back in to the classic multi-factor authentication portal, all right? And you can just list in here the ranges of trusted IP addresses. Now, and I'm thinking that eventually this will move into conditional access, but for the moment, it's quite useful. So you can skip multi-factor authentication for these IP addresses. And this is quite useful, let's say if the user's working from home. Now, the other thing that we can also set up here is this is where you can configure certificate authorities. So if you've got information about any certificate authorities that you're working with, whether it's public authority such as GoDaddy, VeriSign, maybe it's an internal certificate. So again, you can upload details about those certificate authorities here. On top of that, the other things that you can see is it's also integrating with identity protection. And it's really important because when you look at Azure AD identity protection on its own, it's very nice and it does a great job. But when the power of it is when you really integrate it into conditional access. Now, identity protection has gone through a number of big changes recently. And as you can see, it's now giving you a lot more information. So what we've got then is, out of the box, you've got a number of what we call policies. And you can have that user risk policy. So the risk, by default, it goes to all users, which I think is ridiculous because you wouldn't have that. So it's much more likely that you're going to come in here and you're going to bring in your management team. So this is my management team for my organization. And all I'm doing is I'm putting them into a bucket and I'm labeling them high risk. All right. So once you've labeled them high risk, you can then say, okay, if there are any issues, do you want to allow access and require a password change? Do you want to block access? What do you want to do? All right. So you can choose. Am I going to enforce the policy? Yes, I am. Okay. So I'm going to save that policy. Then you've got things like the sign-in risk policy. Again, I've just chosen the same users. So what's the sign-in risk of these users coming in? Please note that you can also create a multi-factor authentication policy as well. So again, if you want it to go to all users, or let's say just certain users and groups, you can go to that. So for example, I'm in Sterling. I'm going to do this for my Sterling HQ. Let's add them in. So I've added my group and I'm going to then say, yeah, I want them to use multi-factor authentication. All right. So I'm going to switch this on and you can see require Azure AD multi-factor authentication and it's ticked. Now where it really comes into its own though, is I'm just going to go back here. Where it really comes into its own is this conditional access. So you can see that we've still got the same name locations in here. The one thing that you definitely want to do, I think, with conditional access is you probably want to have a terms and conditions. So if you've got terms and conditions and you want your users to be able to see these, then you can just upload these from a PDF file and you can require users to consent to them every time that they log in on their device. So yes, we accept, the company's terms and conditions. Particularly useful, by the way, if you've got guests coming in. So if you've got guest access, you can set up conditional access for guest machines and guest devices as well. So that's really useful for that. So once you've set up terms of use, you may want to set up VPN. So do you want your users coming in through a VPN? And you can generate a VPN certificate, which you can make that available onto their devices, which is great, by the way. What else? So next we want to start creating some policies. And you can create a policy either from scratch, or you can create a policy from one of these templates. And this is new. It's currently in preview. So you can build templates based on identities or based on devices. So if you're deploying devices using Intune, let's say Windows 10 or even iPhones and things like that, then you can create MFA policies based on those devices. Please note, you can also create devices or device templates for things like guests. So you could require guests to have multi-factor authentication. All right. And you can see that we have a number of different templates configured here. Now, you'll notice that the templates, as I mentioned, gives the policy a unique number. And that means that when the policy flows, it can flow in a specific order if you want to. The number isn't required, but it's quite useful. One really useful feature, by the way, is you can actually put in, it's called an enable in an emergency. So I can create a policy here and call it EM01. And what that does is that caches on the user's machine. And so basically, if the user loses connectivity to the Microsoft data center, obviously the conditional access policy doesn't know what to do because we've lost connectivity. It can't enforce it. So if you create a policy called EM01, enable in an emergency, it's cached on the user's machine, and that would then become the dominant policy. All right, really useful, by the way. All right, so again, you can switch the policy on, you can switch it off, and you can put it into report only mode here. Okay, so again, there are a number of templates. Again, they can be based on both identity or users and or devices. So back in conditional access, I'm going to go ahead. I'm just going to create a blank policy. I'll call this my Oslo HR. In fact, I'll call it my Oslo Sales CA policy. Okay, my Oslo Sales Conditional Access policy. And this is the first of the signals, users or workload identities. So is this for all users? Is it for selected users and groups? Or is it for workload identities? Let's keep it simple. So what I'm going to do is you can either select users and groups. So I can set a conditional access policy then for guests and external users, or just specific directory roles. So for example, there's our admin roles. For the purpose of this demo, I'll just keep it simple. And I'm just going to add a few users here. In fact, I'll tell you what I'll do is I'll just type in the word sales, and I'm going to bring in my sales team and sales best practices. Okay, so that's the first of my signals. So the next one then is I'm going to say if these users are using these apps. Again, you can base it on cloud apps. And you can base it on user actions. So user actions are quite useful if you're integrating 365 and Azure with things like HR apps, human resources apps. Again, for the purpose here, though, I'll keep it simple with cloud apps. And you can select a specific app. So again, there's also a filter here. So again, this is attribute filters. So this is brand new. I can come in and I can say, okay, do I want to search for a specific attribute within an app? Okay, or alternatively, do I just want to select the app itself? Okay, so I can select individual applications here. Now, the problem with that is that when users log in, you get a sign-in token, yes, a cookie, which goes into your browser. And that cookie doesn't know the difference between one or all cloud apps, all right? So for security reasons, you won't be able to, if you do individual ones, you won't be able to control the cookie lifetime, all right? How long can the user stay signed in for and things like that. So for the purpose of this demo, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say all cloud apps. So conditions, so that's the users using these apps, they must now meet these conditions. All right, so user risk level, again, high and medium risk. Remember the identity protection. The sign-in risk, again, high and medium risk. Please note we also have a no risk option as well. So you can create a policy based on a user's if they don't have any risk. We also can manage device platforms. So I can say, yeah, do you want to include all of these device types? We could travel back to the 90s and have a Windows phone. I won't. I'm just going to say, yeah, just these devices. So I'm going to say, yeah, Android, and let's say iOS devices here. Location. So in this case, I'm going to configure location but I'm going to exclude all trusted locations. All right, so I'm going to exclude those. So if we configure MFA here, the requirement is to have multi-factor authentication, then it will exclude those specific locations. And then finally, the client apps. So again, I'm going to configure this, and as I've mentioned, you've got two types of client apps. You've got apps that use modern authentication, so OAuth, OpenID Connect, and this enables things like MFA support. Whereas legacy apps, so if you've got really old copies of Microsoft Office or old web apps, again, these are old, and this is a serious security flaw because these can bypass MFA. So definitely I'm going to disable those. Okay. What else? This is a fairly new feature, filter for devices. I could say manufacturer, I could say equals, I could say Dell, and I could add an expression, and I could say, okay, a Dell machine, let's say the device ID, okay, so it has a specific device ID. I could say the model equals, and I can say XPS, and I could say, right, what next? I could say device ownership. Now that's really cool because you can create a policy just based on a specific set of devices. So really, really granular, okay? Now, based on those conditions, I'm going to either allow or disallow access. So in this case, I'm going to grant access, but require multi-factor authentication, except from trusted locations. All right. You can also, we have a new feature. It's called Authentication Strength. I'll show you that in a second. All right. So you can configure the authentication strength. I've not configured it yet, but I'll show you where it is. Device to be marked as compliant. Again, if you're using hybrid Azure AD joined devices, you can also ensure that the client is using an approved set of apps. Are you going to just allow some or all of these controls? Again, for the purpose, I'm just going to say one of these. Okay, in this case, MFA. So you've granted control. Finally, the session. Do you want to enforce the session restrictions? So again, you can use conditional access app control, and this integrates into things like Microsoft Defender for cloud apps. So you can basically block the user's device from downloading documents on their device. And you can also create a custom policy. So for example, users can't cut, copy and paste and things like that. Now you'll notice that when I clicked on the link, it takes me through to docs.microsoft.com. So if you're not quite sure what a component does, then it's got some really good help features. So other things that you can control, sign-in frequency. So do you want to restrict periodic re-authentication? Do you want them to re-authenticate every time they log in? Okay, so that takes away the keep me signed in option. You can also have a persistent browser session. So in other words, it's the cookie is always persistent or never persistent. Again, that's quite useful. Keeps you signed in as well. This is CAE, or Continuous Access Evaluation. So this works with all the security components in Azure and 365. And it's continually monitoring the user, the application, and the device's behavior. If there are any anomalies, if something happens and it just doesn't look right, it will immediately prompt or it will immediately send an MFA prompt, so multi-factor authenticator prompt. Disable resiliency. So resiliency is provided through that EM component that I mentioned. So if I name this component EM01, this conditional access, it will be cached. So if you don't want that resiliency, you can disable it here. So I could go ahead and say, yeah, I'm happy with switching this on for my users because they're in a specific group of users. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create that. All right, so there you have it. There is my policy. It's now on, it's now activated, and it shows you when it was last modified as well. Just coming back into security, and I want to come into security and I want to come into authentication methods. We have a new feature in Azure AD. It's called Authentication Strength. And in Authentication Strength, you can configure the authentication strength here, right? So you've got the 3 defaults, multi-factor, passwordless, and also you've got phishing resistant MFA. But you can create your own strength here as well, and then switch that feature on in conditional access. To be honest, I have to say profiles that they've created already, I think, are actually okay. I think they've done a pretty good job here. But if you want to, you can go in and of course you can configure that. All right. So there we go. Just authentication strengths and a little bit of conditional access. So there you have it, some of the new and cool features which come now part of conditional access. I really hope you enjoyed it and that it's given you a little bit more confidence on how to work with the product. Just wanted to quickly mention, by the way, the new learn.microsoft.com platform. Definitely check it out, really useful, and all the course outlines, course content is actually available on there now for free, by the way. So definitely go ahead and check that out. And also, of course, remember that you can also book Microsoft exams there. So definitely check out learn.microsoft.com. Definitely worth having a look. All right, that's it for today. I'll see you next time around. Thanks so much for joining me. Hey, thanks so much for dropping by today. Here's a couple of videos that you may enjoy, and while you're here, go ahead, click on the subscribe button and you won't miss out.